Alright guys, today I'm going to be installing these Jeep cables on my Jeep. And the reason being is they've seen better days. You can see I've got some corrosion going on here, especially on this one. And then our wires are breaking. This is the factory connector. This is looks like someone's done some work on this before. Didn't do a great job. If you look close, you'll see the battery is actually melting where this, or the plastic is actually melting where this wire's been getting hot. And the issue I've been having is I'll be driving down the road and all of a sudden I'll lose power to the Jeep. The engine will still run, but I'll lose power to the Jeep. All my headlights will go out and everything. And I'll come up here, wiggle this harness, which wiggles those wires, makes contact again, I can resume my commute. But it's been getting worse and worse. And actually the reason that made me start looking at this is I've been having a speedometer issue where my speedometer has been reading erratically and it's throwing off my cruise control and not giving me an accurate reading on my speedometer, which makes it, hard to follow the speed limit and whatnot. I have to pull out my phone and look at a GPS speedometer to make sure I'm going the correct speed. So that gets annoying, but it was getting worse and worse, and especially, when it starts shutting off on me while I'm, mid-drive, it gets annoying. But, I could take this off and redo it, and, it would work for a little while. But apparently these cables are just known to go bad, and you can see the factory crimp. I mean, I could almost pull these out with how loose they are. And but this Jeep's got 230,000 miles on it. It's 23 years old now. And so it's ready for some new, higher quality, better made cables where I'm not going to have any issues and I don't have to worry about, my Jeep shutting off. But also to add to that, back to the speedometer issue, for the last year, I've had that issue where the speedometer, isn't reading accurately. And I thought, it was some issues with the modules or the wiring between the modules, because on these Jeep WJs, they get its vehicle speed sensing from the ABS speed sensors. It's not off the transmission, it's from each individual wheel, and then those sensors come to the ABS module, and then the ABS module generates a vehicle speed signal and sends it to the PCM, and the PCM takes that signal and uses it for what transmission or the gauge cluster or cruise, speed control or things like that. But what I started to notice, the other day when I was having an issue, when I was diagnosing the speedometer issue, I unplugged this, I unplugged the connectors at the PCM back up in there. I unplugged the connectors at the PCM and I cleaned them. Well, when I did that, I removed the battery cables, as you should, so you don't, cause a potential short where you damage a circuit or you don't shock yourself. And so I removed the battery cables, cleaned the connectors on the ABS module and the PCM, and then I put the battery cables back on. And then all of a sudden the speedometer started working perfectly for like a whole week. Like it glitched like once or twice, but for the whole week I had cruise control, speedometer worked perfectly. And so I was like, oh, well, maybe there's just a loose connection, or, I cleaned those connectors. So maybe there's something that I cleaned that fixed it. Well, then a week later, the issue came back worse than ever. And then my Jeep started to do that shut off thing. Well, I would come in here, when the Jeep would shut off mid-drive, I would come in here, check my battery connections, lights would all come back on, and then I would start driving again. Well, I noticed that whenever I did that, my speedometer started working again. And so I think there's a correlation now with this bad ground, or potentially bad positive, with the speedometer or ABS module, whatever. Maybe it just isn't getting a good ground that it needs, and it's throwing things off. The other thing that kind of hints to that as well is my transmission will sometimes shift like at the wrong times. The shift timing gets thrown off, and so that could be an issue where the TCM is not getting a good ground. It's not being able to get a full 12 volt power, and so it's throwing it off. You never know with some of this electrical stuff. Sometimes the most random stuff shows up. But so the reason I'm doing the Jeep cables too is to eliminate the possibility of battery power supply to the vehicle being an issue, because I am ultimately diagnosing the speedometer issue, and then it started to die on me mid-commute. And so before further diagnosing the speedometer, I want to get this out of the way in case this is causing that issue. And if I put Jeep cables in, and then I still have the speedometer issue, at least I know it's not this. So for $120, I figured it's worth it to get this kit put on. Hopefully it's pretty straightforward. It's just a fuse, some wires. I went with the 4-gauge wires because they, according to their website, they for stock applications, you don't really need anything more than the original wire size. If you were running a bigger alternator or sound system or stuff like that, where you needed some more juice, you did have the option to move up to a 2-gauge wire. But I decided to stick with, it was like $50 more, but I'm not doing anything crazy with this Jeep. This is just my daily driver, so that over there is the one I'm doing crazy stuff to. More news on that later. But yeah, so let's see if I can't get this installed. I've never done this. It didn't really come with instructions, so I'm just going to kind of figure it out as I go. The first thing I'm going to do is get the battery out of its cradle, and that way we don't have any risk of shocking ourselves while we do the rest of the work. Here you can see that cable and where it was melted a little bit. We got the battery disconnected. Pull it out, set it aside, and then I'll start removing the old stuff. So the only wires are these here to the fuse box, that one there, and then we got a ground that goes to the fender, this wire that goes to the alternator, this ground wire my hand's on that goes to the block, that red positive that goes to the starter solenoid, and then this ground, which turns out this one's not even connected, but it goes to the valve cover up to the firewall. So it's interesting that's not even connected. This too could be contributing to some issues. I did do a head gasket replacement on this, so I probably left that off without realizing it. So we'll get we'll get this harness out. I'm not going to reuse this loom. Depending on how it looks, I might replace it, or I might just leave it as it is. So we'll get this hose out of the way and get this fuse box up and out so that we can disconnect the fender bolt here and the fuse box wires. Alright, got the radiator overflow hose laid out of the way, and then we're going to get the fuse box up. You just kind of push these tabs in, 2 on each side. Plastic on these tends to get really brittle, so just be careful when you're doing it. I'm going to take a knife and gently pry these back, see if I can't lift it out. Alright, we got that up and out. I ended up breaking this tab and one of the other ones, but that's okay. I'll probably get a new one of those at some point. So we'll get this cover up. And we're just going to be removing these two here to get these wires disconnected. These are both 10 millimeter. There we go, disconnected. Now we'll disconnect this ground on the firewall, or on the fender. This is also 10 millimeters. All right, so we've got this side of the loom disconnected. Pop this connector off here, and then we'll remove this positive wire on the alternator. So for the alternator, you got this black cover. Push on these tabs, pull it up. And it's a 13 millimeter nut. Take that off and disconnect the field wires from the alternator, just so I'm not pulling on it until I get it out of the loom and rerun it. And then next is going to be the starter solenoid wire and the block ground. And there is the ground bolt to the block. It's a 14 millimeter. And then for the starter solenoid, it's going to be this red wire right here. It's a 13 millimeter nut. And then we need to disconnect this connector here. And then we've got these zip ties that press fit into the fender. I'll be replacing those. At this point, everything should be free. Make sure not to get all tangled up in here. And there we go, there's the full battery harness. So these green and brown wires here that run to this alternator need to go back. Same for this wire for the solenoid, and then whatever that is. So yeah, we'll start running the new wires. Once I get the old electrical tape off, the loom actually looks like it's in pretty decent shape. So I think we're gonna be reusing it. Alright, I've got the harness mostly stripped down. I left it somewhat together, that way I know, where to tape it up. Got the old loom pieces there, old tape in the pile there. So that way I can copy this over to what's in the truck. Alright, so now what I'm doing is I'm taking the new wire, laying it over top of the harness, kind of where everything goes, and I'm just going to start replacing these points where it's taped with the new wire. So I just did the alternator, or starter solenoid, so that's coming off, and then I'm going to tape this in place right here, kind of work its way up through. Alright, I know it kind of looks like a mess, but here's the old harness. I've kind of separated it a little bit by now, but I matched, all the tape points and the lengths and everything with the bottom end of the harness. Everything that's going to be down up under the engine and everything, like the starter and the ground. And then I put the old looms back on and then retaped it nice and shiny, so it looks, kind of factory, but upgraded and new. And I did all the way up to the battery, so that way, I can tape everything up top, but everything that's down below, I wanted to get it done before I install it. So we're gonna put this in, hook up the bottom end, and then we'll start doing the alternator side, and then I couldn't match the old harness, you know, 1 for 1, because this new kit comes with a fuse. So there's a little bit of a wiring change that I gotta do. So let's go ahead and get this new one installed. I got some those wire tie push mounts. So to replace those ones I cut, and then another roll of electrical tape, because I almost emptied my other one doing all this. It sure looks good though. Before I put my connector back on, I want to put some dielectric grease on the connector while I'm at it. Then I can slide it on. There we go. And now we'll attach the red wire. Okay, I've got that bolted down and the connector back on. Alright, next I've got to get the fuse hooked up and the wiring to this junction box hooked up. So this is kind of the tricky part, where everything's in kind of not in place. So I also need to figure out where I'm going to mount the fuse. I could mount it literally just on top of the box like that, which is kind of what I want to do. Or, I don't know, I want it to be somewhere that looks good, looks intentional. Like that looks intentional. But if I sit here and, you know, zip tie it to the side of something, it doesn't look very good. So, I mean, to be honest, probably just do that. The hood shouldn't have any issue closing. In order for these wires to fit in here well, there's a bit of a tight turn here. So I'm gonna probably need to cut off a little bit of each side here to allow me to mount this at more of an angle like this, so it doesn't have to turn and potentially rub against this metal. And then this cover that went over the old wires, I'm just gonna cut it right here and here and snip this off so that it's not sitting on top of those wires like that. That way everything can clear each other. Here we go. That doesn't look too much like a hack job. And I just tested it, clears those wires good, so we're good in that aspect. I still don't like how close these are to the fender, so I'm not sure. I'm really gonna have to make sure I put some sort of shielding over this. I do wish they probably incorporated some sort of 90-degree bend or something in these cables. Okay, got the hard shell that they put in between the positive and negative here. Kind of helps it, I guess, keep everything straight. I'm trying to reuse kind of a lot of the factory stuff to keep the original shape and everything. I don't want it to just be a big mess of wires. So trying to reuse all the shielding and everything to make it look good. So I got that in, kind of got all the wires where they need to be, kind of loosely. And then yeah, this is where I'm going to mount the fuse box. Now I'm trying to beat the rain, but got most of it done. Picked up some more conduit for some of these wires I'm not going to be able to include into this. So separate. Just gonna do the red ones. The black one doesn't really matter since it's ground. And then we'll be pretty close to being finished. The rain has slowed down, so I'm back out here. Got everything taped up with new looming. That way there's no exposed insulation. I was able to maintain the general, factory layout. Down there is all taped up, safe from heat and chafing. So we're getting close here. And then for these mounts on the fuse, it works out perfect to mount it in the back left corner here, like this, because the screws will come out through right here, which doesn't obstruct this diagram, and then the other ones come out through this black space. So I can put screws in here without affecting, you know, the functionality of this lid and being able to see where everything goes in the diagram. So that's gonna work out nicely. All right, now we just hook everything up. Got some dielectric grease on this alternator plug. Good. And then we'll hook up this wire. There we go. Black cap is in place. Got the junction box terminals hooked up now. Next is going to be the, I think this is headlights. Plug that in. Then we can put the battery in. It's a little wet because it got rained on, but so here is how it works. There we go. And then we've got our fuse wires that wrap around like so. And yeah, works quite nicely to kind of keep everything off of everything else, and it's not just a big jumbled mess. Don't forget to wire brush your terminals for good clean connection. And there we go, tightened down. Everything's nice and snug, solid. Last thing we need to do is hook up our zip ties down there where we took them out earlier to make sure that wire doesn't go anywhere it shouldn't. And there we go. You can see the zip ties down there. Last thing to do is this wire from the firewall to the cylinder head. And that bolt is just right up in here. And then it gets mounted to, it's supposed to get mounted to one of these, but there's no stud. Maybe I'll just come to this one in the back. Okay, so the bolt here that was holding that other ground line, the head of the bolt just passes right through the eyelet on the new wire. So I'm not gonna be able to use that. So I ground off this bracket here and the nut. So I'm gonna sandwich it on there, and hopefully that will work as a ground. I haven't really had any grounding issues, just having this disconnected all the time, so I'm not really sure. I guess this is just an additional ground, but to be safe, I'm gonna ground it to that stud and the cylinder head, make sure we're good. I've got it grounded there and there on the valve cover. We should be good. I'm gonna go ahead and put the fuse in this and tighten down those studs, and we should be ready to crank this thing. And we are done. Time to give the Jeep a crank to verify everything's working. The wiring down there looks good. Doesn't look like a hack job. I'll take my hood holder and crank it up. Alright, everything is cranked up just good, and we'll go for a test drive. I also need to run and get some fuel, so that'll be a good chance, and we'll see if this speedometer works. My speedometer appears to be working. So far, so good. And I'll run it for a good couple weeks and see if it ever falters. But usually by now it'd be giving me issues, so looks like we are good to go. That's it for this video.